right, it says we are live. So good evening, everyone. My name's Adam White. It is time for the February 2021 Government Legislative Affairs Update. And we will give folks a little bit of time to get set up and join in for us. A lot of folks are getting some notifications right now. I'm seeing, lots of folks jumping online. So good to see some familiar names. And we'll see what we can talk about tonight. So if you have questions, I would ask that you go ahead and put them in the comments, and I will do my best to read them as they pop up. If I don't acknowledge your question, please give me a few minutes, and if I don't say something about it, acknowledge the question, send it to me again on the comments. No promises that I'll be able to get to all the questions or even be able to talk about the subject right away here tonight, but I promise you that we can communicate offline and be able to deal with a lot of those things that may come up. So good to see a lot of numbers popping up here. We got about 28 people on Facebook and about 24 people on Instagram. And if folks can kind of give me a thumbs up for a sound check, that'd be great. Of course, using cell phone connections here in Nenana is not always the best way to do it, but you take what you have and you make what you need, because that's all I've got available for us. So, all right, so got some thumbs up popping up. That's good to see those. So what I want to talk about tonight, I've got a list of things here on my laptop, so I'll be looking down at that to make sure I'm staying on task. Several things happening. Of course, COVID is still an issue for us. You've heard in the news the numbers. You've heard some of the things that are going on with testing requirements. The vaccine is out. A couple of different types of vaccine actually are out there. Mask mandates are being talked about a lot. Testing requirements for traveling. And how does that affect us in general aviation? Lots of ways. John made a comment there about boiling water. So those of you who don't know what's going on here in Nenana, you may have read in the news, our water plant, the municipal water supply, failed yesterday. It froze up, and so Nenana is on a boil water notice until, well, the foreseeable future anyway. But thankful that we don't have to melt snow anymore to be able to flush toilets and all that. So anyway, sorry about that rabbit trail, but John, thanks for that. And it is good to be still functioning. So back to COVID and mask requirements. I posted something on the Airmen's Facebook page a few days ago, copied it over to Fly Out Alaska. A rather robust conversation that happened. Executive order came down from President Biden mandating masks in the public transportation sector. What does that mean for us in general aviation here in Alaska? Well, there are several airports, Fairbanks, East Ramp included with that, Lake Hood included with that. I put a list of those airports on that social media post, so you can go back and look at that later. Basically, it says that you have to wear a mask just as if you were inside the terminal getting on an Alaska Airlines flight. Here's the problem. We're not going to get into debating the pros and cons of wearing a mask. I can tell you that my interactions with folks is you are either on one side of the fence or the other, and you are more than 6 feet away from the fence. You practice very good social distancing on this issue. And so we're not going to debate the pros and cons of wearing a mask. It doesn't really matter. What matters right now is that we have an executive order that's been handed down from President Biden through the FAA, through the CDC, through TSA, and it has been issued as a security directive. And now what that means is that they have deemed this a security threat, is how they were able to get it pushed through. That's a little problematic. As we know, executive orders don't follow the public process. And so the state is going back and looking at this, reviewing it. Multiple levels of state government are doing this right now, not just DOT, and figuring out what does it really mean? What does it actually include? Because the language in this executive order implies that if you are within the confines and the boundary of a Part 139 airport, meaning there's air carrier traffic like Alaska Airlines or some of the other larger carriers, you're going to be required to wear a mask. TSA is struggling with this because they don't want to enforce this outside the confines of the terminal because they just don't have the manpower. They don't have the time, they don't have the resources. That's a little problematic. State DOT, their responsibility is maintaining an airport. It is not to go around and make sure you're wearing a mask. But right now, as it reads today, the mask mandate stands, and it is it's the rule. It's not a health mandate. It's an executive order that came down through a security directive. You can get in trouble, federal penalties, large fines, and other things if it were to go to that point. So I'm tracking this. I'm in conversations with folks in different levels of government, in conversations with our sibling organizations, all the other alphabet groups, and talking about what does this really mean and what can we do about it. There is great hope that we can get these mandates, and I slipped up in using that word because it is not a mandate. If we can get this security directive that came in via executive order, if we can get this modified so that it is not quite so crippling for us here in Alaska to be able to live our life and be able to operate on an airport. So again, we are not going to argue the pros, the cons, the benefits, the disadvantages of masks and their spread of COVID and how they may influence that. Right now we are dealing with federal law that has come down through an executive order, through a security directive, through the FAA, the CDC, and TSA that we're dealing with. So I'm on it. I had a conversation with a person that wanted to know how come we didn't stop this. It's an executive order, folks. President signed it. There is no public process for that. It's a hard thing to go back and deal with, but we're on it. So enough about that. Some of the other things that are COVID related, you've heard in the news that it is now a federal requirement to have a negative COVID test if you are arriving into the United States within 72 hours of your arrival time, from your departure from your international location into the United States. You have to have in your possession when you arrive a negative COVID test. How do we handle that with general aviation? It's going to be a difficult thing to see how that goes this summer with folks that want to come to Alaska and tour around. We still have travel restrictions here in the state. The state of Alaska, at some of the urging of myself and Tom George with AOPA and some of the other folks through the Governor's Aviation Advisory Board, if you go on the state's COVID website, it is much easier now to find out what these local travel restrictions are for some of the off-highway communities, whether it's land highways or the marine highway system. So please, 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 please make sure you know and understand what the travel restrictions are before you go flying out to another community. Folks think that this summer they're going to be able to go and do whatever they want. We're still going to have some travel restrictions, folks, and we're going to have to figure out how to navigate around that. So we have to add this to our pre-flight planning. Coming through Canada, Canada is closing down their borders even tighter for certain types of travel. A lot of folks are wanting to come to Alaska, and it could be problematic stopping in Canada for a tech stop to refuel, to use some pilot speak with a tech stop, and then continue on and come into Alaska. Unfortunately, you probably have heard of the accident where a fellow lost his life in that accident coming from Ketchikan to the lower 48. Tried to make it nonstop, and he came up short, and he lost his life because of that. So several other things involved with that accident, but we need to be careful with our flight planning. We need to be very vigilant about making sure we are not taking unnecessary risk and challenges to be able to complete our flight if you're coming to Alaska or going to the lower 48. And that's not a lot of us, but we gotta really figure this stuff out, folks. And I'm working on that, trying to figure out ways that we might be able to do this a little bit easier for just stopping, refueling the tanks, emptying our bladders, and getting back in and going again. So anyway, looking at some other things here. I don't want to spend a lot of time tonight. Last month we went a little bit long, but I want to make sure that we cover some other things here. So let's see. Yeah, John's talking about the VFR flight to Providencia this summer and some of the issues that they're trying to work through about the testing requirements to be able to come back home. It's a problem. It's a big hurdle that we have to figure out a way to mitigate and overcome with these things. Let's see. Some funding issues. You probably have read in the news that the governor has proposed a bond package that has included some transportation and infrastructure projects included with that bond package. So I'm looking at that, studying that, trying to figure out what that may mean for us. There is some COVID relief funds that have been released by the federal government to Alaska through the FAA Airports Division. I'm going to find out more about that tomorrow morning in a meeting. So that's going to help. The governor is wanting to increase some revenue, new sources of revenue with a bond package, so we can fund some DOT projects here in the state. That's a potentially very good option. If we can release a bond package, that means that we may not have to look at increasing revenue from increased fuel taxes or landing fees or registration fees. That may help stave that off for a while. One disadvantage to a bond package is that there's interest involved. And so the money is not necessarily free. We would have to pay, as a state, have to pay interest on those loans through that bond package. What does that mean for us? How much extra money are we going to have to raise to cover the interest to be able to do the same projects? A lot of questions, a lot of uncertainties, a lot of things that are being worked through, and so I'm following that issue as well. Let's see. Speaking of funding and DOT, great news that came out from DOT last week. The scheduled fee increase for leases, rentals, and fees at state airports, that scheduled increase that was on the books has been postponed this year. The state has graciously allowed that to be postponed for a year. So the rate increases that were supposed to happen for 2021 are going to be pushed to 2022 now. So that's good news for us. Let's see. Other COVID relief type things. We've talked in past months about what the FAA has done with some COVID relief when it comes to extending timelines for currency requirements, medicals, some inspection programs, and all the likes of that. There were a couple of extensions that were given to that. Thankful that the FAA was willing to entertain that conversation and work with us and other organizations as we brought those things to the table. But those things will go away. The FAA has stated that at April 30th, when those things were set to expire, they will in fact expire. They will not extend those any further than that, is the news that we're hearing today. And that effective May 1st, we are back to the normal as far as flight reviews, medical certificates, currency requirements, inspection programs, AD compliance, all those kinds of things. All the stuff that was included in that special FAR 118 goes away April 30th. So let's see, invasive species bill. There's a bill that was pre-filed in the Alaska legislature that is an invasive species bill. I've been reading over that, looking at that. There is some potential for some impacts for float plane operations. And so we'll be tracking that as things in Juneau start to spool up a little bit. Been kind of a rough and rocky start there in Juneau again this year, but hopefully they can get organized and get things going, and we can see some progress there in Juneau this year. Not seeing any questions popping up here, at least I may have missed one or two. If I didn't say anything about them, please go ahead and let me know again if you have a question. Speaking of May, I mentioned that the COVID relief there from the FAA expires April 30th. In May, if you haven't heard the news, the Alaska Airmen's Association is going ahead with our Great Alaska Aviation Gathering. We are going to move it a week later, which had normally would have been the Valdez fly-in, but they're pushing their event till later in the summer. And the Alaska Airmen's Association will have the Great Alaska Aviation Gathering in person. We will not be in Anchorage, though. We have decided to move out to Palmer, to the Mat-Su Valley, to have it at the state fairgrounds. Now, what that's going to do for us is we're going to have a lot more room to spread out, some large pavilions and buildings that we can have some vendors, but give a little bit more space for social distancing, a lot more room to do some other things that we enjoy doing. We're going to have food trucks. We're going to have some static displays at the fairgrounds. A lot of folks have asked about that, and yes, we still plan on having static displays at the fairground. Some of those will actually land at the fairground, which will be neat to see. Others, we're working with the city of Palmer to be able to tow or taxi those aircraft from the Palmer Airport to the state fairgrounds, which is just a short distance. We are also going to have some static displays at the Palmer Municipal Airport as well. We're working out the details of that. There will be a shuttle bus going between the airport and the fairgrounds for folks who want to see those static displays, or if you decide you want to fly in to the Palmer Airport, you can land there and then catch the shuttle back and forth to the state fairgrounds. So we're still working out a lot of the details. Don't have a lot of the actual fine points of the logistics worked out just yet, but the good news is that we feel fairly confident that we'll be able to have an outdoor event May 8th and 9th this year. So again, it's one weekend later than normal, so make sure you adjust your calendars accordingly. Unfortunately, Sunday the 9th is Mother's Day, so some of you moms out there, apologize for that, but that was the weekend that was available for the fairgrounds that we were able to get this done, and so that's the plan. We will be having the Great Alaska Aviation Gathering in Palmer May 8th and 9th this year, and keep an eye on our social media outlets and on our website for more details. There is quite a bit of information already on our website, so if you do have questions about that, feel free to start there. If you have more questions, you can call the office and they will be able to help you there. So speaking of calling the office, if you have not bought your raffle ticket for the airplane this year, and if you haven't been watching the updates that are happening, Acme Cub is doing an excellent job building an airplane for us this year. Exciting to see the things that are happening there. Go back and watch some of those updates, but make sure you have bought your ticket and buy more than one. Do me a favor, will you? Buy more than one. It's a great airplane. I wish I could be eligible to win, but as an employee of the Airmen's Association, it just wouldn't look right if I won the airplane, so I'm ineligible. So buy a ticket and win that airplane, will you? Having the gathering is going to help with our bottom line, but it's going to be great to be able to get together. At least that's the way it appears now, trying to figure out the requirements for all that social distancing and everything else. But the Airmen's Association, we do get a lot of our operating revenue from the funds that we generate from the raffle. So just being honest with you, we need to sell out of those tickets. We need to sell out every year, but this year especially, it would be really good for our budget to be able to sell out of those tickets. So call the office, 907-245-1251, and call and buy your tickets. And again, buy more than one. You know, you only need one to win, but you sure do improve your chances. And the airplane's not the only thing we're giving away. Go to our website and see all the other prizes that are available. A lot of really good stuff there. So those were the main things I had on the list. One more, actually two more things. The 2020 General Aviation Survey is out, and some of you are going to go, oh, really, already? We got to fill this stuff out again? Please don't throw those cards away. Please go online and fill out that survey. It is incredibly important for me to be able to go to the FAA and go to other government agencies based on the data that we have from that GA survey. It really does help understand what the fleet here in Alaska is doing, the equipage of the fleet, the number of hours, and all of that. And it helps. It really, really does. So Here in Alaska, every airplane gets a card to be able to fill out to be part of that survey. In the lower 48, it's a random sampling, but thankfully the FAA knows and understands that Alaska, we need to have good data. So please, when you see that notification, whether it's via email or from a postcard that you receive in the mail about the 2021 GA survey, please participate in that survey. The other thing that I'd like to ask you to participate in is the Graphical Forecast Alaska tool that the National Weather Service is going through with the Aviation Weather Center. Interesting things that are being tested on that website. In the email that went out letting you know about this event tonight, there was a link there. Afterwards, give me a little bit of time and I will post a link in the comment sections of both Instagram and Facebook to be able to get you to that page. Play around with it. Look at it. See what you like, see what you don't like. There is a survey button up at the top of the screen. I encourage you to send that feedback back to the National Weather Service so they can kind of go back and change things up a little bit and fix some things that you may have found that were broken as part of that graphical forecast tool for Alaska. I've been using it. I've appreciated the data it gives me. It's actually really, really good tool. You know, here in Alaska, we don't have a lot of weather reporting in remote areas, and this uses some forecast models. It uses satellite data. It uses the METARs. It uses other current condition reports, and kind of comes up with a best guess of an area forecast in a graphical representation. Like I said, I've used it, especially the ceiling and visibility and the winds. It has really helped me make a go, no-go decision that then I've gone back and looked at. If you do use the tool and you do go flying, file a pilot report. Pilot reports are actually an incredibly important tool for these developers to go back and look at so they can say, hey, we had a pilot in this area, file a pilot report. What did the graphic forecast tool show for that time frame? And they compare the two. And if there's a disparity, they'll go back and look and try to figure out why their model was not correct. So always important to file pilot reports. You should have a goal of filing at least one pilot report on every flight, even if it's just the weather was as forecasted. That's actually a very good pilot report to file. You don't have to file a pilot report just because something you encountered was not in the forecast. So they need to know that they did a good job with their forecast too. So just a quick scan of my list here. Those were the things I wanted to cover tonight. I haven't seen any questions pop up. Lots of good folks watching tonight, so I appreciate that. Also want to remind you that these are archived on YouTube, so you can go back and look at past conversations we've had in the months previous. And yes, I am still wearing Hawaiian shirts for these events because we're still in the middle of dealing with COVID. And I started that almost a year ago to try to bring a little bit of, just a little bit of excitement instead of the doom and gloom of COVID. So hopefully we will be able to get back to some more semblance of normalcy this summer. And I know a lot of folks are reaching out to me having questions about traveling to Alaska and traveling in Alaska. Again, please go to the state's COVID website where you can find out more information about travel restrictions, travel requirements for entering the state of Alaska for those folks that are outside of Alaska and are not Alaska residents. Please do your homework before you try to just show up because you'll be surprised. So anyway, with that, I will say good evening and looking forward to an opportunity to someday be able to sit down across the table from each other and talk face to face instead of this way with social media. It's better than nothing, but it is not what we prefer. So anyway, with that, good night, blue skies and tailwinds, folks. See ya.